Hello. I feel like I'm arguing before the Supreme Court. I'm so not used to this. I'm used to circles. And this is a little, I would say, intimidating if I was going to be honest. Plus the fact I'm apparently on the web, or this is streaming. And what I've heard about the web is that, like, once you're on it, you know. So I have to behave myself, I guess, or not. I'd like to begin with a poem by Denise Levertov, whose poetry is one of the sources that has enriched my life, my spirit, soul, over many years. And like good poets, she not only opens up something, but she catches me off guard, which I need to be caught off guard a lot. She writes, by the way, it's called Primal Wonder. Days pass when I forget the mystery. Problems insoluble and problems offering their own ignored solutions jostle for my attention. They crowd its antechamber, along with a host of diversion. My courtiers wearing their collared clothes, cap and bells. And then, once more, the quiet mystery is present to me. The throng's clamor recedes. The mystery that there is anything at all, let alone cosmos, joy, memory, everything, rather than void. And that, O Lord, Creator, hallowed one, you still, hour by hour, sustain it. Days pass when I forget the mystery. Problems insoluble and problems offering their own ignored solutions jostle for my attention. They crowd its antechamber along with a host of diversions. My courtiers wearing their collared clothes, caps and bells running through my head, in and out of my ears. And then once more the quiet mystery. Once more the quiet mystery is present to me. And the throng's clamor recedes. The mystery that there is anything at all, let alone cosmos, joy, memory, everything, rather than void. And that, O Lord, Creator, hallowed one, you still, hour by hour, sustain it. Whatever it is that breaks through and touches off that wonder, that amazement, astonishment, that there is anything and everything, and there is presence which sustains it all, is the place from which I hope to speak, to add my voice. I don't always do it, but I keep poets around, and Denise is one of them, to remind me that this is so. I also want to begin our discussion about adding the voice with the primal biblical text, our debut as human beings, which actually doesn't go so well. But where we hear the first direct speech from Yahweh to us, to Adam, but ultimately, really, to us. Yahweh is walking in the garden at the breezy time of the day. I think that's one of the most beautiful lines in all of Scripture. Just imagine that, walking through your own garden that you made. Walking to the garden in the breezy time of the day. Pausing to ask a question. Where are you? The first speech, maybe the most important voice that we will ever hear, is that question. Where are you. Where are you? How do you hear that? How do you intone that simple phrase? What emphasis do you give those words? Where are you? How would you say it? Where are you? There's the R. It's like, where are you? This is why I love reading Bible. You could read it a million different ways. How else could you read it? Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? 3 words. It's amazing. I actually have heard this voice a lot, and I've heard it in all those different intonations. Where are you, David? You, the person that you are. We might imagine that God perhaps knows where they are. They're hiding in the bushes. And I suspect, at least as the biblical narrative has it, in this great religious imagination of the Hebrew people, it is, we would be there still were it not for this voice that we hear addressed to us, not generically, not to humanity, but in a very personal way to each one of us, over and over and over again through our years. Where are you? And if we have the courage of Adam, we step out from our hiding place with a very simple response. Hineni, here I am. That's all I am, is me. That's all I can bring out. That's all that's asked for, is me. That's the voice also that is critical for me to hear whenever I begin a new session with a patient or when I meet a person. I feel like somehow in my work as a pastoral counselor, that divine voice, that voice that's searching for us, is asking me to give voice to that and to touch that longing, that fear that we've been found. And that voice which goes through the fear to touch the longing that we actually want to be found, but we don't know what's going to happen if we are. What happens if we really come out? What happens if we step out behind our hiding places? Well, what happens? Pardon me? If we get seen, we're exposed. You can use all kinds of words that we all use in our work. It's the place of our vulnerability. Adam tells Yahweh why he's hiding. Well, I was afraid. I heard the sound of you walking. I didn't want to be seen. And yet, that's exactly what we want, is to be seen. But it's initiated, I think, by that voice that wants to see us, in fact, sees us, even though we're hiding and we don't think so, So, I want to imagine in our session, as many as we are here, that we are actually gathered here to collaborate around the care of a particular person. We would call it a case. I prefer the particular person. So that we're speaking about care and adding our voices not in the abstract, but as we address a real someone. So as we begin, I would like you to think of a person or persons that come to your mind as we begin. Someone you're caring for. Someone you're trying to help. Take a moment, envision them, call them to your attention, make a place for them, as John Switten was saying this morning, be hospitable and make a space. Keep them in your heart, in your mind. Then jot down a note or two during our time together, our discussion, our case study, that might suggest an insight or an intervention, that may cause feelings to arise or questions which need further reflection, contemplation. And then I would urge you at the end of the session to underline 2 or 3 things you've heard from us gathered that you can take in your caring to this person. Does that make sense? Imagine that you have been invited to a consultation concerning this person who you have in your heart and mind. Maybe it's a couple, or you're working with a family. The table has an empty chair for you. The rest of the places are occupied by a medical doctor, maybe a psychiatrist, an outpatient individual therapist, or a marriage and family therapist. There may be others present as well. In my clinic, which is very large and whose programs are really diverse, it could be somebody working in one of our many recovery programs, addiction programs, could be group therapy like DBT. You know about DBT? Dialectical behavior therapy, and on and on. I mean, we're like a one-stop shop, and we keep adding. So the table is crowded. Around the table, people start talking about the case and the work that they are doing with this person. You listen carefully as the case is presented from all those different perspectives, each provider with their particular point of view, and then they turn to you. It's your turn. What do you want to say? Have you been in that situation? Yeah? Yes. May it be more so. We worked at the last session talking about developing collegiality and more collaboration. I hope this becomes more and more a part of our work, although there's a lot of forces against it. So I'll lead off with the person that's in my mind. She's a middle-aged woman who has referred to me for grief therapy. That's what came through the message. The person she had been working with for a year was leaving the clinic. The therapist knew that I had experience with the grieving process. So I did as I always did. I went out into the waiting room and looked at her. I called her name, and she responded with a shy smile. She walked into my office and sat down, and we began our first session. So let's give her a name. I think I'm going to call her Sally. In those opening moments of our session, I turned on my laptop, which I have to do these days because everything is electronically charted. And I'm required by the regulations of my clinic, which is a faith-based clinic, by the way, but also Rule 29. Does that make sense? It's a state-regulated clinic. It's one of the reasons why I can actually take insurance, because I'm licensed. I'm not licensed to the state. My accreditation is through the American Association of Pastoral Counselors. It's always a funny business to be there, but I have to be under the supervision of a licensed person, and that's okay. So anyway, in those opening moments, I opened Sally's electronic chart for the first time and saw for the first time her diagnoses. I'm going to give you the diagnosis and the coding, just because it's just so remarkably complex. And it adds to the feeling, at least within me. Asymptomatic postmenopausal status, V49.81. Borderline personality disorder, 301.83. Cyclothymic disorder, 301.13. Grief reaction, which is a V code. We have 5 axes. This is V code. We can talk about that. High risk medication use, V code 58.69. High cholesterolemia. I don't really know what that is. I'm not even sure I said it right. Moderate recurrent major depression, 296.32. Personality disorder, not otherwise specified, 301.9. Recurrent major depression and partial remission, 296.35. Severe recurrent depression without psychotic features, 296.33. And finally, bipolar disorder type 2, 296.89. How do you hear that? That's a question for you. Pardon me? It is, of course, impersonal. Diagnosis is impersonal. Or some diagnosis is impersonal.
It seems like piling up, just layering. Each person is adding.
Each person is adding something.
Where are the strengths? This sounds like a whole truckload of problems.
Well, we do track strengths, of course, that's part of the metrics, but in the diagnosis, there's no diagnostics for strengths. This is all pathology. That's where our voice comes in, partly. It is, I mean, these are serious people who are working in their world, and what happens is, of course, if you work in the mental health field, you have to, the diagnosis forms the basis for the treatment. You have to connect the treatment goals to the particular diagnosis that you're using. Otherwise, you can't get paid. I would say it this way: if you want to get paid, you have to do that. And my clinic, that's not an if. And more than that, it has to be done in the first session. This is a very new thing for many of us who've been practicing in this field, particularly as pastoral counselors, but also as psychotherapists for a long time. I mean, I would never even imagine to arrive at a diagnosis in the first session. And so if we're talking about stigma, like we were with John Smith, I mean, this happens very quickly. Before we're just looking at symptoms, and we're going down this tree, and we're picking up a code. And I'm not saying these are even unreasonable at this point, but you get this sense of overwhelming, whoa. And I do. Yikes, I think to myself. What did I get myself into?
The more you read that medical shorthand, I forgot her name.
Yeah. Remember her name? Sally, yeah. John was talking this morning about that mental illness is a way of naming things. It's a way of kind of trying to speak to a particular situation, and that it's really critical to recognize that that's all that we're speaking to is a very limited and particular diagnosis. But it comes with such a weight of authority because it opens up, on the one hand, services. And it's the basis on which pharmaceuticals are dispensed, It's very powerful. And for any of us who've been caught in the medical field for many other kinds of issues, when a doctor says, you got this, ooh, you got it. It comes with that imprimatur of somebody really knows this. And so when you see this list, it's quite extraordinary. And it's quite overwhelming. So here I am sitting at this table, and I hear all these people coming up with these diagnoses. And I have to decide. So what am I going to do? Am I going to choose from one of them? Or am I going to add my own? So I add my own. I add my own, which is the first expression of my voice as one who could name her pain in the language that's understood in the mental health system. Anybody want to suggest a diagnosis? Pardon me? Well, the problem with the grief diagnosis, at least until maybe this new DSM-5, and that's not quite finished yet, I'll say something about it, but you don't get paid for grief work. It's not, you have to show medical necessity, because this is the medical system. Pardon me? There it is. Did you hear adjustment disorder? Boom, plus this marvelous category. Adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, 309.28. I mean, one of the things that is partly a crisis for those of us who work as pastoral counselors, people who come from a slightly different orientation, is, do we really mean this? Are we really, is this, and to not say what you mean, and to not be honest in the opening give and take of the session seems to somehow betray what this is all about. I don't disparage it. It's not that it's not helpful, it's that given that all of that diagnoses, I'm left wondering, what in the world can I do in the face of this? And then I end up feeling diminished. Grief, after all, I convince myself, I rationalize, it's a process of adjustment. So it is an adjustment disorder, is it not? But isn't all of life one adjustment after another? Don't we all have an adjustment disorder of some kind? I had an adjustment disorder just driving into Chicago last night. And believe me, I was not at my best. You can ask my wife. What is it? It's my reaction to a very highly stressful situation of not knowing where I was going. And this is my hometown from a long time ago. Franz Kafka writes that to be a human being is to be born into a world not made up of our own hopes and desires. The process of becoming human is adjusting to this truth, finding it out along the way. That is, our humanness is, this is not the way I intended it. This is not the way I thought my life was going to go. I didn't expect this. For Sally, she was in the midst of a season of life that she did not want. She did not want to be where she was. This was not how she had planned it. But quickly, through her heavy sobbing, I heard the litany of losses. 2 parents in a single year. And also a very significant relationship. Someone whom she had planned a life with, who had dreamed of a life together. And her life froze the moment he was first diagnosed with inoperable cancer, which led to his inevitable decline to death in a year. So she devoted herself to him, and even setting aside, as you can well imagine, the grieving of her parents. It was enough to do. Well, this was unfair. And since she is a good Lutheran, she was angry with God, but in a very nice way. Feel a little like Garrison Keillor there. She actually knew that I was clergy and worked as a pastoral counselor. And so, she took a risk, almost as if one were to talk with a pastor, except that we're in a closed room and I have confidentiality. She doesn't know me. But nonetheless, she addresses, quote, my authority as pastor, somehow, to give her permission. Could you be angry? And I do what I always do. I say, yeah, you can be angry. In fact, I was beginning to feel a little angry with her. This was, after all, a tsunami of loss. For now, at least, there were enough symptoms under the headings of depression and anxiety to support my coding. I should make you aware that DSM-5, which has just come out, is studying the possibility of what they call persistent complex bereavement disorder, which it is arguing begins if the person is still grieving significantly after the 12th month, following the death of a close relationship, or 6 months if they are children. And we've been talking this morning about mental illness, but here is this, what we know as a very normal part of life, now brought into the notion that there's a kind of normal way to do it or not a normal way to do it. And if you've been working in hospice or in grief support groups, my wife is a bereavement counselor for hospice in the Twin Cities. This is astonishing. And you should know, if you don't know, that hospice mandates bereavement counseling for 13 months after the death. If you don't know that, that is really important. If you have people in your congregation who are in hospice, they are entitled to 13 months of free bereavement care.
Their families?
Yes, their families too. This goes back to the very beginning of hospice, which is one of those movements that has stood on a holistic understanding of the dying can be done with dignity, and that the bereaved have to be cared for. But also, as my wife reminds me, and as I know from my own experience, 13 months, often the second year is the worst. Because the reality of the loss really begins to materialize. The emptiness is, oh, this is real. So if that happens, then it's persistent complex bereavement disorder. And I have to say, just kind of cynically, I think this is one way for insurance to pick up the thing. Forgive me for that, but it seems amazing. On the other hand, it seems to me that people who are in serious grief, significant grief, should be able to use their benefits. But she says, what's wrong with me? Why am I still grieving? And we do, us, all of us who work in this field, try to normalize it and say, well, every grief is unique. Every grieving situation is unique. And I can certainly say to her, and I have, you got a lot of loss here, Sally. There's a lot to work through. Mary Oliver writes this poem and indicates this, and I feel it every time I'm with Sally. She calls it heavy. That time I thought I could not go any closer to grief without dying. I went close and I did not die. Surely God had his hand in this, as well as friends. Still I was bent, and my laughter, as the poet said, was nowhere to be found. Then said my friend Daniel, brave even among lions, it's not the weight you carry, but how you carry it. Books, bricks, grief, it's all in the way you embrace it, balance it, and carry it, when you cannot and would not put it down. Well, 12 months may move us into abnormal grief, but there's something that I'm locating in Sally that I need. Can you feel it? Can you hear it? In this last words of Mary Oliver, when you cannot put it down and would not put it down. What are you hearing?
There's a need to do it.
Yeah, it's not over. Nobody's going to tell her when it's finished. We hear that a lot, right? Aren't you done? Aren't you over? You say, somebody would come up to her and say, maybe you ought to be dating. And she just wants to. I mean, there is strength in that tenacity to hold on to that pain. It isn't just pathology. Do you understand what I'm saying? Would not put it down. I want to argue this out. I want to feel this out. I want to speak this out. I want somebody to hear me. And I don't want them to run away because they're tired or because it's too much. Because that happens. Diagnosis is interpretation. We heard that from John this morning, beautifully conveyed. And it conveys an authority through careful evaluation, and hopefully not just an opinion, but based upon specific criteria. But we cannot help but also diagnose from our experience, our intuition, all of which have underlying assumptions. I bring myself to the diagnostic process. Who I am is important. Who Sally is important. I always view diagnosis as a partnership. It's not me coming up with something and saying, this is what you have. Let's talk about what this is. And then see how we're going to name this. Diagnosis is interpretation, and interpretation is hermeneutics. I should get the pastors kind of jumping around here with that. We read a text as we, quote, read a person who is a living human document, so described by Anton Boysen, one of the leading psychiatrists in the early 20th century, and one of the original voices in the pastoral counseling movement. I mean, there were people long ago talking about integrated health. We've actually stepped back recently from what used to be. We read a text the way we read a living person. My first job while sitting in the room with Sally, when I can take off my eyes from the list of all the diagnoses, pull myself out of my yikes moment, what did I get myself into, is to learn now how to read her life. Not how I want to read her life, or how I feel comfortable reading her life from my particular discipline, my point of view, as one empowered with authority. But how does her life want to be read? Can I be open to go with that? Can I begin with that kind of openness? That I will begin perhaps with some questions, and then she will respond, and she will be leading the dialogue, and she will tell me how she wants to tell her story. This is really so important. And you know, if you also work in the mental health field, that people come in and spend half the time in the waiting room and then the other half in the office, you know, writing forms. And we gather information in the most impersonal way. Load it into the computer. I never look at it before I've met the person, because then I've already made some decisions about how I'm going to read them. If I had looked at her diagnoses before Sally was sitting in the chair, I would have gone, oh, she's borderline. That's going to be tough. She's not going to be able to form a therapeutic relationship. And I don't know, you know, because I have all that stuff in me that I would have brought. So I try to start before I speak, to listen and to be open, because I don't know what to say yet. I'm making sense. So we ask the same thing of a biblical text. How does this text want to be read? And most importantly, in this sense, in the way I read text and teach text, not so much how I want to read it, but what is required of me to read it. Sally will teach me if I have ears to hear, if I listen carefully, and most critically, if I'm willing to visit the places she wants to invite me into. If I don't want to go there, she won't tell me. And you know as well as I do that we know immediately when we're in a conversation with someone, whether it's a therapist or a friend, we look in their eyes and we start telling them something painful, and it's like, oh, well, that's that. You can tell. And so this very personal relationship that's being developed, particularly in those opening sessions, while we're trying to, is to be very mindful of our language, very mindful of what we're feeling inside. Because I love going to the DSM-5 when I'm feeling uncertain about myself, because it's authority. You know? Am I making sense? Henry Nouwen, in his book, Creative Ministry, written now way back in the 70s, points to the same communal interpretive process as reading a text, as doing pastoral and spiritual healing. The two questions we bring to text reading, consciously or unconsciously, are, who am I and what am I to do? Who am I and what am I to do? You read a passage in the gospel, you're asking it, who am I? What are you saying to me? And what is this text requiring of me? Same thing as with the person. So sitting before Sally and then at the table with all these other providers, I first need to ask the question, who am I? Who am I to this person? What kind of a relationship do I intend to have, or do I think we can have? What do I think I can do? What can I offer by the way of help? These are all questions that Nouwen is flushing up, because what he's clarifying is the integration of identity and vocation, identity and practice, an integration that never is once and for all, but takes place throughout our life. This question, who am I, can never be answered once and for all. You know, I find myself having to ask it if I'm good, if I'm listening, every time we meet. If I don't, I'm lazy, and I'm going to miss something. He writes these words in 1971, which I think remain timely and relevant, as all his work is. Not like John Weiborg. He's at the center of things, so it just goes on and on. The question, Nouwen says, is a very realistic one in a world that is becoming more and more professionalized and where one specialty after another is developing. Many ministers feel that they are amateurs in every field and professional in none. And in the middle of the confusion, they often feel very inadequate, suffer painfully low self-esteem, and doubt if their theology can be made operational to such a degree that people can actually be helped in an effective way. When this happens, inevitably we're close to burnout. What can I do? I don't know what I can do in the face of this diagnosis. My first response is, yikes. I'm not the person for this. I'm just a pastoral counselor. I practice psychotherapy. Nonetheless, when it comes right down to it, my identity is rooted in a pastoral counselor. And sometimes I'll just say, only in the face of what it looks like needs to be done. Am I connecting with any feelings you have from time to time when you're working with somebody? In other words, if we're going to speak, we need to speak to the person, but if we're going to speak, we also need to speak from the center of our identity, what we do. It needs to be our voice and not somebody else's. I've learned over many years in personal conversation with highly recognized therapists and psychiatrists, by the way, they also have the same feeling. You can have all the degrees and things on the wall, and when it comes down to it and you're standing before a human being in pain, if you don't ask the question, so who am I and what do I think I can do? I don't want to refer to him. That just becomes arrogance. Who am I? I am a pastoral counselor. Most importantly, I am Sally's pastoral counselor. What am I to do? What am I to say in the face of this pathology? So I could choose to find my niche, as I said, in the list of those diagnoses. And I could also use my experience of being overwhelmed by those diagnoses to touch that part that connects me to her. For heaven's sakes, if I feel overwhelmed, what must it be like to be her? This is how we use our own feelings to get a sense of the other. She doesn't have to tell me. I feel it. I'll test it out. So I don't want to discount the conclusions of the other people at the table or to set aside their diagnoses, but somebody needs to speak for Sally here. Somebody needs to help Sally come forth and be present in this discussion. I take this cue from Jesus, the healer, who does not heal a blind man, but a person born blind, marginalized and objectified by his own community, left on the curb, while all those around him are discussing the diagnosis. Whether the man was blind because he sinned, or whether he was blind because his parents sinned, and they're going on and on about this because this goes back into the whole root between Deuteronomy and Ezekiel. Is a person responsible for their own behavior, or do we suffer for the sins of our parents? This conversation's going on, and this guy's blind. And Jesus turns to the blind man and heals him. But what's so remarkable about that story is that even after, with renewed sight, the man who now sees is still not believed as seeing. You remember the story? It's as if nothing has been done. They don't believe it. This is, by way, I think, a stunning example in the first century of how stigma of illness remains even after treatment. A person can go through treatment and feel much better, come back, and you're still bipolar. That's what we were talking about this morning. We're more comfortable talking about the illness out there and marginalizing people than we are about saying, whoa, what is it that happened to you? Welcome home. That's why this symposium is so important. And by the way, I say that it gives me great comfort, though with due humility, that Jesus was often asked, so who are you to speak? What authority do you have to say anything here? Who are you to mess around in the lives of healing and getting involved? Where are your credentials? Henry is now, and is very clear that through all of his writing, that our identity as spiritual helpers, guides, pastoral counselors, pastors, and practicing pastoral care, that this identity is not only critical, but it is ongoing. And that identity needs nurture and care and collaboration. He describes two features of it that I find also continuing important for me. One is self-affirmation, that we can, as Nouwen says, touch the heart of life. Affirm the life and being of the person. We can do that. Amidst all the diagnoses, I can do this. I can be present. But equally crucial, the self-affirmation and confidence needs to be held, he says, with the same awareness of self-denial. We also know as self-emptying or kenosis. Have the same mind in you that was in Christ Jesus, who emptied himself. You know the text from Philippians. Set ourselves so there's room. We don't fill the room, we make space for the other. John Swinton did a very beautiful job talking about us being hosts of guests, opening space. This is inestimable. This by itself is an inestimable gift. I hope you know that, so that you don't underestimate how critical it is. When we sit in a doctor's office waiting to see our psychiatrist and we only have 15 minutes to have our medication evaluated, or when we end up filling out countless forms to track our symptoms and our progress toward our treatment goals, there almost is no time left to just be together and to affirm the person who's before us in their pain. I take this from Psalm 4 when the poet cries out, "Answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room." This Hebrew word, rahav. You gave me room when I was in distress. It's this Hebrew sense of pushing out the boundaries until there is room enough. What will it take to allow all of your distress to come in? That's my job, is to make room for that. We make space so others can speak. We listen so we know what to say. We don't elbow our way to the table. We don't say, get out of the way. You know, we're here, we have an equal right to be here. I take it from Jesus that whenever we enter a room, we best not rush to the seat of honor. When we come to a table, we're servants. But we have something to say. So when I'm asked to speak, I first want to talk about Sally in her particularity. I want to value her struggle, her tenacity. I want to present her cry, and to be one who hears and who makes room for others to see and know her. In that room, in that space, in that collaboration. Questions or thoughts? No. I think we're digesting lunch.
Do you have a suggestion that in that 15 minutes, how the clinician can see that person?
Hold on, I'm sorry. I want to make sure the online process is
Thank you. Yep. Yes, hi, this is Cheryl. I have a question. How can then a clinician who has only 15 minutes really see the humanity of that person, because there is a reality that there is 15 minutes?
Yeah, right. That's why it's so important we're at the table. Because in many ways, the psychiatrists are so limited in what they actually see. And I have to say, they rarely read our notes. And we have very little time, if any, to be at the table and to say, well, I know that, let me tell you how I think Sally's doing. So that maybe we can, there are some that I can do that with. And that's one of the important things about the kind of collaboration I'm urging, is that you make friends with psychiatrists and psychotherapists, so that if you're, as a pastor or spiritual director, that we're able to have this conversation from time to time. I've left you a piece for a release of information, because I think that's also important. It's harder for me in a system like mine, in the medical system. We're bound by such HIPAA laws, we can hardly talk. One of the great things about being a pastor, you have to watch what you say, and you got to keep confidence. But it's precisely this place where we are so needed at the table. Because everybody else is talking about this, and I'm getting to know Sally, and I can talk from my experience with Sally.
The question up here.
I was just going to suggest that you use the example of the therapist doing intake and how she spent the 15 minutes.
That's a good question. I don't get it, but I know who's asking it, by the way. But
It's not a question.
Yeah.
It's not a question, it's a suggestion.
Say it.
To tell the story of the therapist that you were talking to who was asking the same question about how to do an intake in 15 minutes. And the fine line she was walking between therapy and just information. Never mind, sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. I'm getting it. This is a big question about intake, and you know this because if you do intakes. Can you do an intake without doing therapy? Who's saying no? Come out from wherever you are. Yeah, I mean, in that sense, that's really important because you can get information off a sheet that people fill out, but what does that really tell you? You have to ask a question. You got to follow it up. Do you mean this or do you mean that? Is that where you were going with that, Susan? Yeah. Yeah, because so much of what people know about, particularly even in a psychiatric interview, is just what's been. I mean, there's almost an hour of signing forms before you ever get into the room. That's not their fault. They're hard pressed. Like all the medical field. I mean, it's just for a lot of them, it's not fun. It's just rushing and rushing and rushing. It's not how they were trained, and a lot of them, it's not why they went into medicine. So I have to say, here I'm back. I'm asking this. I go back to my identity with her. We have a session in which she wants to talk about her anger again. She's raised this before, but this time she tells me that she stopped praying. And it really deeply concerned her that she was no longer praying. But she stopped praying because she was angry. And even though I had given her permission to be angry, she decided to stop instead of express it. At first, she was hesitant how I would take it. But either way, what I discovered, I'm sorry, I went someplace in my mind and I've got to come back. Either way, we were talking about her anger. She still couldn't body it forth. She couldn't bring it to voice. So I pushed her a little bit. I said, well, why don't you say what you want to say? And she said, I'm so angry that this is how my life what my life has become. I said, yeah, I know that's why you're angry. You're angrier than that. I'm really angry that this is what my life has become. Yeah, I know you're really angry about that. No, I am really angry. I do not understand why. I don't understand why God would do this to me. If God loved me, why did he do this to me? Can you feel that question? How do you feel it? Where do you feel it? Down here? And we talk about mind, body. I mean, we're all the time up here talking about anger. Let's be angry. I'm really angry. And then you feel it and it comes out. And you have the same feeling, even the way I said it, you know.
I got paralyzed.
Yeah.
And isn't there a point too of compassion too as well that you feel when you hear that sound?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a deep compassion and a deep concern. So therefore, as you begin to counsel the person, you're not counseling the person from their perspective. It's your faith and trust in God and the hermeneutic that you have developed based upon what you're seeing and exercising.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But on the other hand, I want to also touch what I'm feeling in that moment and see that as critical for this relationship that I have with her. Because what I want to do is what we often do is go up to my bookshelf where there's a load of cliches. And I want to say, well, you know, or this or that, you know. And sometimes they come out of my mouth and I want to get them back in. And sometimes I'm able to keep them on the shelf. Because what I really want to do in that moment is honor her cry. I want to just listen. I want her to do it, to feel it, to say it. Not relieve it at that moment, but to hold it. This, I finally did say something, by the way, at the very end of that session. I said, Sally, you just prayed. This is faith. I trusted her voice was heard. I didn't have to tell her that the voice was heard. I trust that the voice was heard. Here is the first evidence of life that I had really seen in her through all of her tears and her woe. This was free speech. This was unbridled and uncensored and risky expression, which is, by all stretch of the imagination and definition, I think is prayer. Sharon Salzberg writes in her book, Faith, at times like these, not only do we find nothing to place our hearts upon, we can scarcely find our hearts at all. We feel lost and utterly alone. It's as though we are curled in a dark alleyway while others nearby are in a restaurant enjoying their meals, drinking fine wine, choosing their desserts from among the many selections. If we cry out, no one will hear us. If they did, they wouldn't care. If by some chance someone cared, we wouldn't deserve it. Our pain is the most enormous thing in the universe and the most meaningless. If I'm at the table with others, I hear from them that Sally is depressed. I also want to say that she's angry. But I want to give voice to Sally's faith as I witnessed faith in her. And through my own understanding of how I've come over a lifetime to rethink, reimagine this word, again in the writing of Sharon Salzberg. Faith is the ability to offer our heart to the truth of what is happening. Faith is the ability to offer our heart to the truth of what is happening, to see our experience as the embodiment of life's mystery, the present expression of possibility, the conduit connecting us to a bigger reality. Days pass when I forget the mystery, says Denise Levertov. And here, Sally brought me right into it. Faith expressed in anger and outrage and pain as the embodiment of life's mystery. I don't have the answer for you, Sally. And I want to have an answer so bad. But I'm with you in the question, and as Rilke says, we'll live through this question. Trusting that, in fact, this expression is the connection to the larger reality, to the deeper mystery, to the one who is listening. So come and pull up a chair with me, whisper in my ear if it comes to you. I'm at there, they want me to speak about what's going on. What should I say? What are the words I should use? What voice should I use to bring to the collaborative of my colleagues? Any thoughts? You're there too.
If you speak the truth from your heart, hopefully it will connect with the truth in their hearts, and the numbers and the titles will disappear.
Yeah. Wow. Did you hear that? Suddenly, isn't it amazing? I hadn't really thought about this before, but when you hear that depth of expression, the numbers and the diagnoses fade. Yeah. You know what I said at the table? I said, here's my diagnosis. Sally is deepening her faith. She is proceeding on her difficult journey to wholeness. And most importantly, her faith is becoming her own. That's what's so powerful about the great cries from the Psalms. These are not so much congregations speaking as poets, expressing something that we know from the human heart. This isn't pathology. This is how we come to faith. God help us that it has to be this painful, but so often it has to be this painful. It comes through pain. That we come to touch that reality which is not about belief as much, the content of our faith, as it is our understanding that we can express who we are and that the one who created us is hearing it. In the handout, you'll see some other possibilities that I've given for language. I want to just go through these, unless you want to pause for a minute.
Can you go back over her faith as becoming her own? That seems to me such a central core of listening and responding and developing a covenant. And there's something there that, that perhaps many of us in the ministry long for in pastoral ministry, but aren't able to get to whether we have our own bibliography with us or whatever. So this thing of listening, it just sounds that right there. I mean, it's just like an open weeping of.
Yeah, that's it.
How do I hear I am?
Yeah. That's a good question. Do you want to gnaw at that one a little too? Anyone? Yeah?
I'm just going to take a big stab at this because I'm obviously not in the medical field, but I am pursuing to be a chaplain. But I think the one thing that I've learned,
No, I'm just going to keep going.
the one thing that I've learned so far is that no matter who you're dealing with, you have to meet that person exactly where
Yeah.
they're at. And also, for us in ministry, we need to, I think someone said you need to feel compassion. And to me, I've learned a new definition of what compassion is. It's actually feeling the pain and suffering of the other
Yeah,
so that you
yeah,
can
yeah.
understand it. And
Yeah.
maybe then you'll be able to better address it.
Yeah.
And reach out in however way you need to reach
Yeah.
out to them.
Guess we're not doing answering questions, so now I know. So we'll just kind of jump around. No worries.
I don't actually have a question, but I do have a comment. I think that I'm not in like pastoral care or anything like that, but by experience, I think, and from what you're sharing about Sally's story, in addition to her loss of her parents and her loved one and her soon-to-be or fiance, I guess, and what you said about her pain, about that she wasn't praying and that she hasn't been talking to God, there's also this recognition of she's feeling a loss of her relationship with God. And I think that that's something to be addressed too, because, you know, as Christians, we often want to feel like, oh, my relationship with God is going great, but when something severe, like what she probably experienced, she's recognizing, I have this loss in my relationship with God, or it's not normal anymore. I don't understand who he is anymore.
Right.
Exactly.
That's the beginning
And
of
so
faith.
There's a very deep pain from someone who, not only did she lose some people in her life, but pain of loss of, I don't know who God is. And I think that is a very, very, very core issue, because we often don't understand where God is in our pain, or how to go to him, or how to talk to him, or how to talk to others about that I'm in pain about my relationship with God, because I'm also struggling with 5 other people who I've lost in my life, or whatever has happened in my life. So I think that's also really important to consider, is that that's what we're really saying, is there's a loss of understanding of who God is. Does he even care? And I don't even know how to come to that anymore. I don't even want to talk to him anymore, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's just my comment about that.
It's great. Anyone else? I mean, but isn't this how we come to faith? Is that our notion of God is shattered? I mean, how can our notion of God be God? Unless our notion of God is shattered, then we don't find God. It's who we think God is, or who we want God to be, or we're hoping God is going to be. And it's always, you know, that struggle with life that deepens or enriches, challenges, or causes whatever we would call a crisis of faith. What's amazing to me with Sally is she's not talking about her anger, and she's not talking about God. She's talking to God. She's yelling at him. That's a relationship.
But she might not know that's what it is.
Right. And I got to be careful about saying, oh, there it is, except that I said, oh, that's prayer.
So you're saying not where are you, Sally, but who are you, Sally?
Well, that's, of course, implied in the where are you. It's.
Is that what God is asking that?
I was taking a risk. You know, I usually play it pretty safe in therapy when I get to these kinds of deep questions. Something in me said, I need to ask her to come out as fully as she can. And what she does then is what we do. This is how faith grows. This is how faith becomes ours. There's only one way for that to happen, and that is through our own experience. It can't be your faith. My faith keeps me in the room, but it can't be my faith. It's got to be her faith. That's what we're growing with all the other disorders. Yeah.
You made a statement on that, and I can't remember how you said this, but I thought it was very, very profound. And it said, faith is when we can express who we are.
Oh, here you go.
Sorry. You made a statement before, and I wonder if you can remember what you said about this specific statement, but I thought it was very profound. You said, faith is when we can express who we are, and then you said something about God is the one who listens or cares. Is that what you said? Mm-hmm. So we can express who we are, and God is what?
God is. And who God is.
And who God is. Okay. Something about I thought you said something about God who's listening. He is hearing. And he is hearing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
But, you know, we withhold. I mean, that's the point. She wasn't being a good church lady there. She was speaking, you know, from the depth of her experience and her pain. Yeah, of course. I mean, Israel is in exile. It's crying out. Of course, where are you? Why did this happen? I mean, this is the story. This is her particular experience of it.
Having just lost both my brothers in a plane accident 2 months ago, I can appreciate where she's coming from. I feel really good now, but the first month was like you're walking through a fog, and I wasn't mad. I've never been mad at God, but I'm mad at my brothers. And when I went back for the celebration of life a couple weekends ago, I went to their gravesite, and I just cried out like, God, why, you know? And I I was finally able to let it go. That I'll never know why. It was their time, but just the pain that was in their lives, it's just what hurts so much. And I had to work through that. I had to reconcile that, and that, we don't know, but good things are coming out of it. We're all closer as a family and stuff, but my faith is so much stronger. If this had happened 5 or 10 years ago, I would have had a completely different response, but I just knew that all I had to do was take God's hand and walk with him every day, because it was so hard. And unless you really know your Father, you can't do that. You just have to give everything up and just trust that God's going to take care of you and get you through that. So,
That's what got you through. That's so powerful.
and it still does. I mean, I feel good now, but I know that I'm still not done grieving, that it'll hit me, and
Yeah.
and I'll deal with it again.
Yeah, you're at the beginning,
But
I have to say.
so anyway.
That's your experience, and that experience deepened your faith. Sally's experience was there's no hand there. But there is a hand there. If I were to say, well, there's a plan for you, we just don't know what it is, I'd have been booted out the way I should be. I'm not thinking about plans. What I'm astonished is at her faith. And now I'm outside that list of pathologies. I mean, she may have a personality disorder. I haven't really thought about it. It doesn't make any difference to me because I got to have a relationship with this person. And she is on some meds, and she has some mood stability. But the lithium is not going to get her through this. You know what I'm saying? It's only supportive, at best. We have to walk through this, and she can't do it alone. And so she shows up. God bless her. Strength, 101.1. Faith, 607.72.
And that segue, as humor as it was, and thank you for that, I'm wondering how it is that, and kudos to you for your response at the table when you're there and you say she's deepening her faith. And when they look at a clinical outcome sheet and they go, I don't see where that's billable here. So now justify your existence at the table yet again, God boy, because 9 out of 10 of us don't welcome your presence here.
Right. Yeah. I think there are providers in my circle that want to talk about it but don't know how. Wow, I don't know what's going on. But, don't know how. We talked about this in the last session. But I think a lot of it is time. No, right, it's not billable, faith. But I don't think it's pathological either. And to me, it doesn't trump, it doesn't make the other diagnoses go away, but it sets it in a context. And here's another way I think about diagnosis, and this is what I've learned mostly from Buddhists. There is this small self and there is this larger self. When we are trapped in diagnosis, we're a small self. We operate out of a small self in a particular way, and we operate differently and imaginally out of a larger self. When we're small and reduced and diminished, when we're not seen, when we're stigmatized, we're small self. When we meet somebody else who sees us, we start growing into that larger self. That's the connection. Now, with me, paltry me, she begins to feel connected. I would say not feel, experience connection. And that I'm watching for. And sometimes when I can develop that language, those words, I'll say, oh, Sally, this looks like the small self. Looks like you're kind of hiding here. That's okay. Sometimes you gotta. But I'm going to be noticing that. I'm not tracking it on a PHQ-9 depression form. I'm thinking about it and relating to her and following her and interested in her.
how long you were meeting with her before she got to that level with you, before she got to be very comfortable?
13 sessions. Pardon me? All outpatient, once a week. Yeah, I mean, oftentimes, you know, if you're working with someone, they will have been through other providers. They're looking for another, how long is this going to go on? Which is one of the great dilemmas in the mental health system. We get tossed around from person to person. And so, you know, this is where pastors have such remarkable capacity, because you see them all the time, you know, in all these different situations. You can connect and then say, could we have an hour? Could we track an hour for once a week? Yeah, way in the back. Did you? Oh, here.
She'll ask her any question, I'll come over there.
Don't we have to be careful? I can't get this on. It's on. Okay. Don't we have to be careful with how we handle their anger? What I mean is, the anger is usually I see it as a protection that at this moment they're using, and to try and fix their anger before they're ready to let go of it almost leaves them in another powerless situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I don't know, when I work with people, I think when I first started working with people, my thought was, oh, I need to start to fix. And then after years of it, now I view it as, oh, I need to let them come to their view, because usually it's a time of their having to let go of their old view of God and find out who God is to them.
Right.
Who he really is.
Yeah. But I think that's what I'm saying, is that I don't want to fix the anger. I mean, a lot of in me wants to fix the anger, let me tell you. I don't like angry women. I don't care who they're angry at. I always think they're angry with me. And this is a huge thing for men. And one of the things I've learned from my colleagues, my women colleagues who've taught me over many years, if you see women cry, a lot of times that's not helplessness like we interpret. That's anger. That's saturated adrenaline, looking for some place to express itself, but it can't in a church. You can't be angry really angry. You can say, oh, God accepts our anger, but you can't really be angry. You can't let those tears flow and know them to be adrenaline, because that energy is exactly what she needs to move on. Not to repress it, but to move on. And that's why I see in that moment, there's the life. You know, there it is, Sally. But I'm not jumping around and, you know, doing this, because I'm kind of on the ground and looking for an answer, and just sit there with her. Yeah. There's something going on back here?
Another question. Another question? You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. I think she's all set here.
So diagnosis is partly interpretation. I've given you a few other words. I really think it's important to build our vocabulary. The words that I've given you on the list, you see those? The first is from Preusser's kind of classic, The Minister as Diagnostician. And here he's kind of working through the kind of bricks and mortar of the pastoral and spiritual vocabulary. These words are huge. And as I was expressing my own kind of evolving sense of what faith is, all these words need a lot of reflection and thought. I have to say that one of the things Nouwen reminds us constantly of is that in order to be able to speak, we need to spend time in contemplation. And that contemplation is not just thinking, but writing. Because writing out the case is different than thinking about it. Same thing. We use a word like faith. Well, that's just easy to say. Grace, it's easy to say. Providence, it's easy to say. Is there providence in Sally's life? How would you even raise it, given how we generally use the word? What is providence? Pardon me? Blessing? Care? Sovereignty? Who said that? Yeah? It's like this provision for what I need along the way. Is there provision in Sally's life? How would we talk about providence? Me? Yeah, partly. I inevitably with each person, when I'm in collegiality with my friends in the spiritual and pastoral world, we ask ourselves this question whenever we bring a case: why has God brought this person to me at this time? Because if I'm open, it will open me up. I will find something new. I will be, in a sense, challenged to find this edge that I've been trying to keep myself from. Asking the same question of being again in a room with somebody who doesn't know what's going on and doesn't think there's anything that's going to help her. You know what I'm saying? That's part of the contemplation. Yeah.
This is God's destiny for an individual, and that's because it's God's destiny doesn't necessarily mean that the individual will find it.
That's right. And how many times have you been in pain or suffering and you found yourself with someone and you can't really understand how you got there? How did it turn out to be them? How did it turn out that you met? How did it turn out from the list of people, all of who could have done wonderful work with Sally, she came to me? I don't understand that. But I take that as a serious question into my work. I can't answer it once and for all because I don't know. And I certainly don't want to impose it on her. Again, I find myself using small self and large self often. If, in fact, we're going to be speaking from a place of faith, I think it's important to be cautious even how we use the word God. There are a lot of people for whom that's not a happy word. And before I impose it, I want to listen a little bit. How do you speak about presence? How do you experience the divine? What's your language? Yeah.
The older I get, the more I experience. The older I get, the longer I live, the greater I experience God, like the mysterium tremendum. I do not really know. I mean, I can't name and say, that's it. But it's this wonderful mystery. And I cannot totally conceive that. It's just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. A glimpse. Well, it's partly why we do the work, isn't it? I mean, maybe it sounds a little self-serving. But I hear my voice, the voice coming through me, trying to find Sally. I think of Yahweh walking in the garden in the breezy time of the day. And I'm glad to do that as best I can. My encouragement to you is that you do it the best way you can without being overwhelmed by all this other stuff that has to do with, diagnoses. Don't say it's beyond me. Don't say I don't have the skill. I mean, what's needed is presence. That's what Swinton is saying. That's what this whole conference is about. And that's the art. And that's the struggle, and that's why we need to be in conversation. This sense of collaboration, of case study, of supervision. If you're not in supervision, you're not doing work. I don't see how it's possible. It's hard to find the time, but we need people looking at our work. We need to share our work openly. We need to have critique. We need to have our language pushed and enriched so that, in fact, we can be more present to whoever it is that comes our way or whoever it is that is brought into our care.
Is that the, when you talk about small self and large self, is to be in a group setting, does that help when you really believe that you have arrived at large self when your colleagues say, no, 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 no?
Well, my Buddhist friends would say, if you think you're in large self, you're not. Yeah. This is the story, and I'll end with this story because this is how I, in many ways, understand what happened that moment with Sally. So this young guy comes to this monk and says, I'm so bitter, I'm so angry, life is so hard. He says, yes, it is. So he takes a cup of salt and he puts it in a glass of water and he gives it to the student to drink. Yes, that's exactly how life feels. He takes the same cup of salt. He walks over to the lake nearby and he dumps it in the lake. And he says, take a cup. He takes the cup into the lake, drinks it. How does that? That's sweet. Yes. The pain is the same. The container is different. That's what I believe, is that Sally's pain was brought by her courageous effort and voice, by the voice of God saying, come out, Sally, was brought into the larger container, which makes all the difference. And I don't know where it's going to go, but I trust that it's going somewhere, and that I'm going to be along for the ride. God bless you.